Hello everyone, it's Woody here for episode 4 of the DayZ playthrough, and today I'm not going to be talking specifically about DayZ. In this video, basically I'm doing some sort of hunter-gathering, sort of survivalist gameplay in the woods on my own, which is a lot of the gameplay I promised you in the first episode, and a lot of people have requested that, so I've decided to, show you what I usually do in DayZ. 90% of the time, the gameplay that I am actually playing is what you're seeing on screen here. It's rural community scouting, keeping a safe distance, being very cautious. That's especially a huge element of my playstyle. But today I wanted to talk about the perception of gaming in society and the media, especially the media, because this has been on my mind a lot lately. With the recent Dark Knight Rises shooting in Colorado, it's got me thinking a lot about how the media likes to try and explain things with pop culture and youth culture, and it's something I wanted to discuss in a video. So, first of all, we need to go back a few years to the Columbine massacre, also in Colorado. In case you didn't know, during the Columbine massacre, two boys who went to a local high school, Columbine High School, decided to basically get a bunch of weapons together and shoot up the school. They let off a bomb in the cafeteria and then open fire on students at random. Now, the reason I bring this up in regards to the media's perception of gaming is because at the time of the massacre, a lot of American news broadcasters linked the seemingly random act of violence to the game Doom. I think apparently both of the boys who did the shooting were big fans of the game Doom. They also attempted to blame, I think it was Marilyn Manson and the sort of punky sort of 90s culture as spawning this kind of violence. So it's a prime example of the media using popular youth culture as almost as an excuse for people's actions, whereas the millions of other people who were fans of Marilyn Manson, I don't even think the people who did the shooting were fans of Marilyn Manson, but the millions of other Doom players as well. Of course they weren't shooting up schools, but two boys who happened to play Doom conducted a massacre, and the media latched onto that, and they said these horrifically violent games with their vivid graphics. If you've ever seen Doom, it looks ridiculous now, but back then people thought this was horrific, gruesome, almost photorealistic gore, and this terrified a lot of Americans. They thought that this video game culture was going to destroy America from the youth generation up, from the ground up almost, that these people would grow up to be manically depressed, gun-toting masochists. And of course that didn't really happen. The people who played Doom grew up, for the most part I assume, relatively normally. And of course the video games that were seen as so realistic back then are now laughed at for their primitive graphics almost. Well, not laughed at in a horrible way, but the graphics just look almost comedic now, like cartoonish. When you get games these days like Call of Duty, which are very, very realistic graphically compared to what was around in the 90s, the Doom stuff just pales in comparison, basically. And people today are still claiming that violent video games are a cause for violence in society, and the main reason I can see for this not being the case is because I think that most people have a fundamental understanding of a distinction between reality and fiction. Now, obviously the guy who shot up the theatre in Colorado didn't have a clear distinction between reality and fiction, because he was, in almost a cinematic style gunning down these people. People say he thought he was the Joker and he's acting like he's in a movie. That's a mentally ill person, that's an insane person. That's not a normal person who happens to play video games and then gets this sort of urge to go out and shoot, in my opinion anyway. And of course the media have always blamed popular culture, as I said before. In the 50s it was Elvis was destroying society with his rock and roll music, and it was horrible, and the 60s the hippies were destroying America and were bringing socialism into it, and the Russians were going to nuke us because of the socialist red devil within, and they wanted to take over the world. But that didn't happen, and for the most part people grew up fine once again. And as the media's perception of gaming has also in turn affected society's perception of gaming, because for a long time the media have been, the television media have been the only source of information for people, and the biased thoughts of Fox News have perhaps influenced society in some way. And obviously today with the internet we do get a much more, I say much more fair and balanced, but I think the internet's probably the place where people's strongest opinions on subjects, especially gaming, people have very strong opinions on gaming on the internet. But my point is that the internet has almost made people more aware of the other side of the opinion, because everybody has an opinion online. You know, you go on a place like Reddit and people upvote opinions they agree with and downvote things they disagree with. That's not how the system's supposed to work. It's supposed to be about relevant information, but people don't like other people's opinions sometimes, and the internet has been the ultimate forum for anonymous free speech, so people feel like they can say whatever they want and get away with it almost, which is a double-edged sword really, because freedom of speech of course is something Americans value highly and it's a great thing, but on the downside it sparks a lot of arguments and conflict between people who wouldn't have even known each other without the connectivity of the internet. So, as I was saying about society, societies, the different parts of society view gaming very differently. The youth culture will, like people like me, will jump to defend gaming because I've grown up with video games my whole life. I mean, I started with the PS1 and stuff like Tomb Raider, and I lived my kind of desires to explore and adventure through gaming almost. I mean, I went out and played with friends too, you know, I used to build dens and climb in trees, but to see such vivid representations of, you know, like these ancient tombs was fascinating to me. But the whole time, I mean, I come from a very scientifically minded family, and my dad was always really clear to tell me, you know, that this is just a bunch of noughts and ones being translated as visual images on screen. This isn't real. This is fiction, and of course from a young age I understood that. Now, the older generation of gamers, for the most part, I mean, I'm generalising here, but older people who haven't had, you know, children who have been gamers, mainly people over the age of like 60 now, they struggle to understand gaming because of course it's a young art, and with young art the older generations are often alienated, because I've grown up with gaming my whole life. You know, I've been using a keyboard since about the age of 3, so it just seems like second nature to me. But to someone who was in their 40s when all this technology came about, I can imagine it was really almost alien to them, this whole idea of people sitting in front of TVs controlling three-dimensional characters in a game. It must just seem so weird to them, and as a result of this they've tended to have more prejudiced opinions on gaming, like, you know, it's making children violent, you know, these people can't distinguish the difference between reality and fiction, and it's just, you know, it's all terrible and it's the destruction of society. So I understand why perhaps older people have these opinions of gaming, because if they believe what news corporations have been telling people over the last 10 years, it does look pretty grim, you know. I mean, for example, the Grand Theft Auto games, there was a whole campaign, you know, to get them pulled because people saw these games as offensive, vulgar, and just overly gratuitous, which I guess on a surface level they are. I mean, as a kid, I wasn't allowed any of the GTA games. I had to go to my friends' houses to play them. But if you think about it, by putting this kind of stigma on these games as being overly violent and gratuitous, that just made me want to play them even more. You know, I felt like, you know, I was sticking it to the man, so to speak, by playing these games. And as I've gotten older, I've realised that the overly gratuitous violence has almost been like sort of like a parody of violent films almost. And if you listen to the radio stations in the GTA games, they're always talking about how, you know, society is collapsing, and they're almost looking at the criticism that they've been given and just making a joke out of it, which I really admire Rockstar for doing. I mean, Rockstar's probably my favourite developer out of all developers, because games like Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto 4, they have these amazing plots. I mean, for a video game, these complex characters that you genuinely care about. You know, like when characters in their games die, I feel really sad, you know, like, alright, spoiler alert here, but at the end of Red Dead Redemption, the main character, John Marston, gets gunned down outside a barn, and I felt really sad after that. I mean, I really related with this guy, you know. He felt like, you know, he was a cowboy out of his time, and the world was changing around him, and he wasn't ready for the change, and that was such a clever idea for me, you know. It felt like I was watching a really good Clint Eastwood cowboy movie. So, but people don't see that when they think of Rockstar, you know, some people anyway. A lot of society just see these games as, oh, you can order a prostitute, which you can, but you don't have to do that. And, you know, it's not like there's a mission that, well, you have to go into a strip club for a mission in GTA 4, but you're not required to have a dance from the strippers. You know, it's all optional, and you can be the good guy in GTA. I mean, you can only kill when absolutely necessary. Especially in Grand Theft Auto 4, you have morality choices. You can choose whether a person lives or dies in the story. And if they're an arsehole, I let them die. And if they're a good person, I let them live. You know, I don't deeply think about it as much as I would in real life. But the morality choice is there, and Rockstar acknowledges that. And I think, whilst people often just see Rockstar games as this horrible, violent thing that children shouldn't be allowed to see, and to an extent I agree with that, I also believe that the games are very well made, and the media never looks at that. I doubt some of these news reporters have ever even played the games, never even played a game in general. You know, they look at the big picture and not the fine details, and it's the fine details that make up a big picture, especially in a news story, and that's something news broadcasters in general seem to avoid in all subjects, especially gaming. However, I think a lot of people don't seem to understand that after a hard day of, like, you know, work or school, to come home and play GTA 4 and just get in a helicopter and shoot everything up, it's great stress relief. I mean, fantastic stress relief. It's just so good to be able to do something like that, because 30 years ago that wouldn't have even been possible in a game. You'd have to, and people wouldn't even think about doing it in real life anyway, but you can just, you know, the physics engine is great, things flip over and explode, and it's fantastic, you know. But it doesn't mean I'd want to go out and actually do that in real life. I wouldn't even consider even hijacking a car, let alone taking a helicopter and gunning people down, because I have a high value of life, you know. I'm against the death penalty. It only maybe in very, very select cases I think the death penalty would be necessary. I don't think it's a blanket thing that can be applied to everyone, and in a way that kind of transcends into my DayZ experience. You know, I find it tough to shoot on sight. I always like to shout friendly, but then people kill me because I don't think everyone else has that kind of high value in a game. They probably do in real life, but in a game they just want to have fun, and I understand that. But my idea of fun is, as you can see in this video, I like going around and playing how I would survive if a zombie apocalypse really happened. And that's one of the things that DayZ's great for, I guess. So, another story I've got here is my cousin, my 9-year-old cousin. I was playing Left 4 Dead with her because, you know, I'm a gamer and I like to share my gaming experience with people, because you know, I used to play games at her age, and I think it's a fun thing. But her parents, my aunt and uncle, said that, you know, she'd been having nightmares and I probably shouldn't play these games with her. And it took me a while to think about it, so I thought maybe I was just sensitive. But the graphics in Left 4 Dead are very realistic compared to what I was playing at her age. I mean, the games I was playing at her age, like I said, the Tomb Raider, where Lara Croft's boobs were like a triangle of three pixels. There was no realism there, and I guess it was much easier to distinguish fiction and reality when the fiction was so obviously cartoonish fiction, and the reality is obviously photo-real. But I guess the line is being blurred, and, you know, I understand that. So now I play Minecraft with my cousin, you know, because the graphics in that are simple, the zombies in that aren't exactly scary. I mean, she still likes me to come down and mine in tunnels with her, which I, you know, regretfully obliged to doing. But I think gaming's important to have in your life, especially as a child, you know, because it allows you to have escapism that you wouldn't have otherwise. And I think if we educate the younger generation as to, you know, the distinctions between fiction and reality and making moral choices, I think games have a big responsibility there. And if we can do that, I guess that's a positive thing for society as a whole, you know, because Minecraft is a very good learning tool. You know, it teaches you things like sharing, a multiplayer experience, all that great stuff. And, you know, my cousin talks to people in Canada who are her age. It's quite sweet, really, you know. I think it's gaming, as it's evolving, is a double-edged sword, as I've said before, you know. With all that violence and photorealism, you also have multiplayer gaming experiences bringing people together, and I really do advocate gaming as a positive thing for children in that sense. However, I don't believe that children should be playing Left 4 Dead, because it probably is quite traumatizing. Although at her age I was watching films like Predator and Alien, but I guess maybe I was just an exception to that, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's all for today, guys. Thanks for listening to this. If you're still here, I mean, it's been, crikey, about 15 minutes now, so thanks a lot for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone's feedback and comments. If you'd like me to talk about any subject in a future video, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Once again, thanks a lot for watching. This has been Woody playing DayZ, and have a good day.